Happen is the minister is going to read a statement. This is going to be followed by a statement by the CE, and then we will have a Q&A from the floor. Colleagues, I would like to remind you of the reason why you were invited to this media briefing. And that reason, as it says in the media advisory, is about the announcement that the Independent Regulatory Board is making today. So let's try to the best of our ability to direct all questions to the issues that we are announcing today. We don't want them to be overshadowed by other things. I know the CEO has worked quite hard for this announcement. So, Minister, with that, I'll hand over to you, and then we'll begin the proceedings. Is there anyone? Can you check this?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be. Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Economic transformation involves changes in the structure of the economy, as well as the institutions which govern it. We need to move beyond justifying the need for economic transformation and find ways to create the opportunity for changes by changing the institutions themselves. The NDP says that we need inclusive growth and economic transformation. Transformation without growth becomes a struggle for current resources, and when current resources are tied up in oligopolistic practices, it becomes an issue for government to address. Accepted ways of doing business that benefit the few and limit access to opportunity for black entrepreneurial business to grow are not aligned to our desire for inclusive growth. The auditing sector is one such sector. The Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors is mandated by the South African government under the Auditing Professions Act 26 of 2005 to regulate the audit profession in the protection of the investing public. Part of its role is to ensure that registered auditors deliver services of the highest quality and adhere to the highest ethics standards, including independence. In line with the legislation, its objective is to create a robust and relevant framework that guides the services of registered auditors and which must respond to our dynamic environment. While mindful that transformation of the auditing profession may perhaps not be the board's principal mandate, it is nevertheless an issue that assumes critical importance in the broader constitutional framework outside of the Auditing Profession Act. In our view, the broadening of audit capacity means it is necessary to attract more players to the market, thereby creating more employment opportunities than is the case in a concentrated market dominated by 4 or a few players. The transformation is a constitutional imperative that binds all organs of state, of which the IRBA is one, and it therefore does not require it to have an express legislative mandate to consider issues of transformation of the profession. After all, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land and binds all organs of state. The IRBA also plays an important role in protecting the interests of the local and international investor community. And to do this, it sets down an agreed set of principles and values supported by well-developed and internationally recognized standards, clear laws and regulations for the profession, which must be revised as necessary. Indeed, the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report has ranked South Africa first in the strength of its auditing standards for the last 7 consecutive years. We therefore all recognize the need to maintain a strong auditing environment as the value of the external audit is to provide the assurance to the capital markets that the opinions expressed on the financial reporting of public interest and entities are an accurate and fair reflection of the state of the company. This enables sound investment decisions. Critical to reliable reporting is that the auditor is independent of those whom they audit. Inspections findings from audit regulations worldwide, including our own regulator, indicate that auditors do not always maintain such independence. This increases the risk that they may not report the true state of affairs of a company. In 2013, the World Bank conducted and concluded its second report on the observance of standards and codes, accounting and auditing for South Africa. The ROSC report made recommendations to strengthen accounting and auditing practices in South Africa towards enhanced competitiveness, governance, and accountability in the private and public sectors. There are over 4,200 registered auditors in South Africa and over 300 JSE listed entities which have a combined spend in audit fees amounting to about 4 trillion rand, making it an important part of the financial sector. In July 2015, the IRBA began a process to investigate how to strengthen auditor independence, looking carefully at issues and threats to independence, but also in the South African context, examining the effects of market concentration and the progress of the profession with regards to transformation as part of its mandate and in fulfilling its role as an entity of the state. It examined closely the distribution of audits of the JSE listed companies to establish the level of concentration of the market, and its study found that despite there being many audit firms, more than 90% of the market capitalization of the JSE in companies whose audit reports are signed off by South African engagement partners was audited by a number of the Big Four global audit firms, which, with much of the JSE listed audit market still retained by the Big Four global audit firms, South African black-owned and other audit firms have consequently struggled to gain access to the market and broaden their capacity. On the matter of the progress of transformation of the auditing sector, the IRBA study revealed that of the 353 companies whose audit reports were scrutinized, it was found that the audit reports of 72% of the companies listed on the JSE that were actively trading as at 31 December 2015 were signed off by white registered auditors. It was also found that 16% of the companies listed on the JSE that were actively trading at that time were signed off by non-South African partners. Therefore, only the audit reports of the remaining 12% of actively trading listed companies were signed off by South African non-white registered auditors, of which only 3% were black South Africans. It is of equal importance that we also look to those structures which have the responsibility of appointing the auditors. If they themselves are not transformed, it cannot be expected that they will ever transform the auditing profession. The IRBA's first responsibility is to protect the ordinary public from material adverse effects affecting the capital markets that could be avoided through an incorrect audit opinion. And this mandate takes preference over the desires of the CFOs and their auditors that do not wish the local audit landscape to change. So when it came to independence, the extensive long tenure relationships the IRBA uncovered, with some in excess of 100 years and many in excess of 50 years, it raised concern that there may be a lack of the requisite independence, whether real or perceived, that would safeguard the quality of audit for the protection of the markets and investors. It then engaged with stakeholders on three possible measures to introduce, being mandatory audit firm rotation, mandatory audit tendering, and joint audits in order to better safeguard independence and protect investors. To put the need for protection into perspective, the biggest proportion of investments of both black and white South Africans is held through mandated investments, indirect investments, not individuals. The largest of these is the largest retirement fund, being the Government Employees Pension Fund, with assets of 1.6 trillion rand, providing for 1.2 million active members and more than 400,000 beneficiaries. In 2013, mandated investments accounted for about 37% of total investments into the JSE's top 100 companies, with the Public Investment Corporation being the largest single investor, holding 12% of market capitalization. In the financial sector, retirement is big business. According to a report of the retirement sector by a large audit firm, the stock around 100 retirement funds invest a total of 375 billion rand into the stock exchange. So who is this indirect and often unaware investor? It is ordinary pensioners and working South Africans who have contributed throughout their working lives to retirement savings, which easily can be lost if invested in businesses which ultimately fail, such as Master Bond and Shemex, which cost many their life savings and all future secure retirement prospects. Our inability to transform the economy has left the poor and unemployed particularly vulnerable to shocks to economic growth. So the cost to the broader economy of a business collapse or audit failure that costs working South Africans their retirement savings would be devastating. So in the manner of independence and maintaining audit quality, we support the IRBA in its efforts to protect the public. The board of the IRBA has informed me of its decision to implement mandatory audit firm rotation. I have indicated that we support the measure but remain concerned about transformation and increasing access to markets because we have stressed that we really need to internalize the mindset that growing black business is good for South Africa. While mandatory audit firm rotation will address the independence concern, it might not immediately address the need to broaden capacity and increase access to opportunity, although the board believes that these outcomes could be advanced in the long term. The board has assured us that it shares our concerns around broadening access and transformation, and will work to develop complementary initiatives to address the broader transformation of the profession. I now hand you over to the CEO of the IRBA, Mr. Bernard Agalas, to expand on the board's decisions. I thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the press. Thank you to the Honourable Minister for setting the scene and offering support for the work of the IRBA. At a recent special board meeting, the board of the IRBA took its decision that mandatory audit firm rotation was the most suitable measure to safeguard auditor independence. The board was afforded the opportunity to meet with the minister last week in order to brief him on the extensive process of research and consultation followed over the last 2 years and the decision taken. To highlight the need for stricter audit regulation, I would like to take you back to the beginning. Since the 1990s, South Africa has experienced a number of corporate failures, with losses for individual and institutional investors running into tens of billions of rands and putting the role of auditors under the spotlight. There were various spectacular corporate collapses and business failures, and I would like to remind you of a few. Unifer, LeisureNet, Sambo, Fidentia, Masterbond, Shemex, Randgold, First Strut, and most recently African Bank in 2014. Many of these failures are as yet unresolved, and creditors and investors still need to be recompensed. The audit failures of Enron and WorldCom in the United States and of large corporations in South Africa brought the independence of auditors and regulators into sharp focus, as the scale of the devastation in the US was astounding at the time. On December 2, 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy, and on July 21, 2002, WorldCom filed for bankruptcy protection in the largest such filing in the United States history at the time. These led to the rapid passing of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act to protect the markets and investors. Nevertheless, in September 2008, these were surpassed by the bankruptcies of both the investment bank Lehman Brothers and the savings bank Washington Mutual, precipitating a global banking crisis. Well before any of these global events, South Africa was already considering more stringent investor protection and greater transparency of reporting. Following on the master bond collapse in 1991, we find the first mention of legally supported shareholder transparency and good corporate governance recommendations in the Commission of Inquiry into the Affairs of the Master Bond Group and Investor Protection in South Africa by Justice H.C. Nell, also known as the Nell Commission Report, published in 2001. The Commission found that the contents of financial statements, the audit of these statements, and the resulting auditors' reports were inadequate for the needs of users and considered a structural shift towards transparency as being a necessity. His pioneering report and recommendations were focused on the need to protect shareholders, not company and company directors. In the opening paragraphs of Chapter 13, which looks at the auditor and the expectation gap, Nell states, and I quote, "Factors such as the growth in size of modern corporations, the growth in the volume of their transactions, the advent and growth of institutional investors, the shift away from the detection of fraud as a primary audit objective, and the diversity of the needs of the users of the financial statements have resulted in a situation where the auditing profession as presently employed cannot fulfill the expectations of the diverse users of the financial statements, who each want to be able to make meaningful investment decisions based on the contents thereof. Not much has really changed, as the pace of growth in transactions and the growth in modern corporations in size, complexity, and technology has only increased." Amongst the key recommendations made by Nell was the need for the profession to move from inadequate self-regulation to regulation by a statutory oversight body which had to be independent from both the profession and outside influence. Locally, following quickly on the Randgold failure, the Auditing Profession Act was passed, forming the RBA in 2006, in line with Nell's earlier recommendation. At that point, Sharemax had generated the largest losses for investors at 2.2 billion rand, but this would be surpassed by the collapse of African Bank, which cost South Africa 7 billion rand in market capitalization in a single day. Business failures and audit failures are not the same, but business seldom fail overnight. In the changing business environment, investors and the public are demanding more information and transparency and have become more aware of their rights, which need to be protected. These issues and concerns have become a focal point for governments and oversight structures around the world. Blaming corporate failure on business risk is also convenient and excuse when audit firms should be cognizant of their clients' specific business risks, so as to plan and then perform audit work which would mitigate audit firms' own risk. The expectation is that risk identification and red flags should be raised by the independent auditors. All these developments have led to international role players, including the European Union, to implement more robust measures with the aim of enhancing the independence of auditors, as independence is recognized as a critical component of audit quality. Independence is the cornerstone of the profession, and the independence of auditors provides investors with the assurance that the financial statements on which they rely are credible. Without the required independence, investors cannot have the assurance that the opinion expressed by the auditor is appropriate in order for them to make sound economic decisions. To establish a measure of audit quality, on the other hand, it is important to consider the results of the RBA inspection program. The sharp increase in inspections findings and decline in audit quality, reported in the Public Inspections Report in 2015 and 2016, points to auditors exercising less than the required level of professional skepticism. The situation is highly likely to occur when the relationship between the auditor and client is too cozy and as audit tenure increases. There's an overall regression in the inspection results compared to 2015, with the number of unsatisfactory inspections of audit firms increasing by 27% for 2016, and the number of unsatisfactory engagement inspections increasing by almost 50% based on the selected inspections performed. These findings are in line with the Global Inspection Survey results issued by the International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators, or IFIAR, on March 3, 2017, of which South Africa is one of more than 50 members. The IFIAR's latest annual inspection findings survey shows a slight decline in inspection findings of the 6 large global network firms, but notes that the continued high rates of findings continue to be of concern to regulators around the globe. Lack of independence is also likely to impact whether or not reportable irregularities are reported to the RBA. The ability of external auditors to fulfill their duty to notify the RBA of irregularities uncovered in the process of an audit, as required by Section 45 of the Auditing Profession Act, relies on independence. The RI process is key in the fight against corporate fraud and corruption. The RBA Public Inspection Report 2016 notes that reportable irregularities were identified on 48 voluntary audits during inspections that had not been reported to the RBA. The Act further requires the audit regulator to refer RIs to the relevant authorities for further investigation in the effort to uncover corruption. It is therefore in the public interest that the independence of auditors is safeguarded by the strictest of measures. Given the audit quality concerns arising in the inspections process in 2014 and 15, the RBA issued a rule in December 2015 to require the mandatory disclosure of audit tenure. This rule makes it mandatory that all auditors' reports on annual financial statements shall disclose the number of years which the audit firm or sole practitioner has been the auditor of the entity. The purpose of issuing the audit tenure rule in December 2015 was to raise awareness around issues such as long audit tenure and requiring disclosure to the shareholders to enable them to be more informed about before voting at AGMs. A review of this information revealed that in the most extreme case, the audit firm tenure was 114 years and 101 years, with others at 98, 91, 72, 66, and many others exceeding 50 years. Not surprisingly, since the RBA announced its intention to limit the tenure of audit firms and require the disclosure of tenure, the shareholder voting at a number of AGMs has indicated that shareholders indeed see a problem with extended tenures and are now using their voting rights to try and force the change of auditors. We believe it is strengthening shareholder rights to hold management and audit committees more accountable and not just ratify repeated reappointments without considering the issue of independence. Furthermore, it is of critical importance that the auditor who performs checks on chief financial officers and financial directors on behalf of shareholders remains completely independent of those CFOs and financial directors, and mandatory audit firm rotation should provide required assurance to audit committees and those charged with governance that the risk that cozy relationships could be developed is minimized. Finally, South Africa relies very much on external capital, and one of the important components of creating an environment where foreign direct investment can occur is a well-regulated and reliable capital market. This, in turn, requires a reputable audit profession to provide potential investors and capital providers with reliable and credible information on which investment decisions can be made. It therefore becomes crucial for the RBA to ensure that the local profession continues to be recognized internationally. The issuing of this rule is therefore aligned to global concerns expressed by other international audit regulators that the compromised independence of auditors impacts negatively on audit quality and can result in inappropriate audit opinions, which may result in flawed investment decisions. Mandatory audit firm rotation is the result of a real need for protection, a requirement for transparency, and enhanced shareholder rights, and also to strengthen the ability of auditors to act with independence on behalf of the shareholders they protect. Thank you.
I was trying to sit down because of back problems, but it seems this mic is not working. So we'll now open the floor for questions. We'll start with the second row, Karen there. And anyone else? Karen, you can go first.
Minister, I think it's fantastic that you're having this briefing around, these efforts to ensure that there aren't corruption and malfeasance within corporate entities. But as I'm sure you're aware, and despite the warnings of your spokesperson, there are a great deal of allegations swirling around the so-called Gupta leak emails. linked to yourself, including that under your watch as Public Enterprises Minister, a person was appointed at the behest of the Guptas to further a deal that resulted in that family and its associates getting an estimated 5.3 billion rand in kickbacks. There are also allegations that you appointed someone, a molecular biologist, I believe, to SAA, who was directly reporting back to the Gupta family. You yourself have reiterated repeatedly that you have nothing but a casual relationship with this family. I think you said that you went to their Diwali celebrations. But in the light of these allegations and emails, what do you say to people who either believe that you have been incredibly negligent in the exercising of your duty and appointing of these individuals, or you are indeed involved in a corrupt relationship with this family? Thank you.
So much for our deal, Karen. But if you don't mind, Karen, we'll deal with that question towards the end. So let's just start with the auditing questions. So I'll take Calden here at the front.
Thank you so much for taking my question. Is somewhat directly related to audit firms as well. This is Calden Normal from ANN7. In the past few days, ANN7 has exposed several irregularities in the IFMS PMO contract. Just want to get a comment from the minister, and also the ministry has been quiet about this whole issue, citing an unfinished probe. Therefore, just wanted to ask how far the probe has gone to and what's the status of that report. And yes, it's regarding the alleged conflicts of interest has also emerged with former DG Lungisa Fuzile, as well as his proximity to bids firms and to Dr. Kasim. And yes, just wanted to get your comments on those, Minister. Thank you.
Minister, clearly there's no honor between journalists and spokespersons. I might end up asking the CE some questions myself, but I'm joking. I'll give it to
you know, I'm always good at sticking to agreements. Minister, on this particular issue, if you could just condense it and explain it in simple terms, perhaps, how the mandatory audit firm rotation, how do you envisage this implementation of this process to bring on board more South African or black-owned audit firms? How do you envisage that happening? Thanks.
Minister, can I take one question from Cape Town? If I think I saw Paul and Linda there. So can I take one question from them if there's any?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Linda.
Thank you, Minister. Linda Insel, Business Day. I just wanted to confirm the implementation date. If, Mr. Gullis, if you could just reiterate that, please. And is this now the final decision? There have been parliamentary hearings into a mandatory audit firm rotation. The groundswell of opposition amongst business and audit firms that it won't achieve its objectives, with evidence being cited that it's failed and been withdrawn throughout the world. In the face of all this evidence, is the board now finally decided that it's going to proceed? Thanks a lot.
Can I take this last one, Chair? Paul?
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, Minister. Paul Vecchiota from Bloomberg. In order to ensure that this rotation happens, is there some kind of incentive or sanction that companies may have to face if they do not comply with this? In other words, how are you going to enforce and make sure that this happens? Thank you.
That's it. Back to you.
Thank you, Cape Town. Minister, the floor is yours. You can deal with the auditing questions first, and then we can close off on the other ones, but it's up to you.
Let me ask the CE to deal with the audit questions first.
Thank you, Minister. Maybe I can also deal with the access to the markets, which was a question that was put to the Minister, but just from our perspective as the RBA, the Minister made it clear that our main objective is to address the independence concerns from the RBA, but also in the longer term we do foresee that it could open the access or broaden access to the markets for other firms and for homegrown firms. This is because mandatory audit firm rotation, the rule will force the audit committee or those charged with governance to reconsider the appointment of the current auditors. Currently, when we look at audit tenures of 100 years, clearly maybe they have considered the any long audit tenure, but ultimately decided to appoint the same audit firm for 100 years, which means that for 100 years, some certain other audit firms were excluded automatically. So the opportunity was never provided to those firms. When you force the audit firm to rotate off, at least the markets can be opened for the rest of the audit firms. South Africa has about 2,000 audit firms, not 4. And a lot of those audit firms are connected to international global networks. So sometimes we are told that it's only the 4 global firms that has international networks. This is not so. A lot of our audit firms do have international networks as well. And therefore the opportunity for those firms should be granted, at least to be considered for access to the audit market. To answer Linda's question, the effective date is the 1st of April 2023. And the reason that we've given 6 to 7 years for audit firms or for before implementation is to allow audit firms and companies to prepare themselves for the change. And therefore, they don't have to rotate on that date. They could rotate any time before that, provided they've gone through the process or considering the audit tenure of their auditors. And to respond to your question as to whether it's a final rule, it is the final rule. The board has spent a number of years consulting, researching, and they've considered the feedback from stakeholders. They've consulted widely, and the board believes that this is the best measure to ensure that they respond to the independence concerns from long audit tenure, the drop in audit quality, and from the results of our inspections report. As to the question, I think that was also put to the Minister regarding enforcement, if the Minister may allow me to, from the RBA's perspective, respond to that. The enforcement of the rule will not be on the company, but on the auditor. The RBA's mandate only gives it the power to regulate auditors. Auditor independence is specifically included under the mandate of the RBA. That it refers back to the ethics of auditors. And because that is under the RBA's mandate, the Act also allows the RBA to issue rules to auditors to strengthen independence, and this is exactly what MAFR is about. Therefore, if an auditor does not abide to this rule, then the RBA will perform an investigation, and then ultimately it might result in disciplinary action against that auditor. So the enforcement powers will be with the RBA in terms of the Auditing Profession Act. Thank you.
I helped him, but he's not helping.
Oh, sorry.
Not reciprocating. Now, you will remember that at Public Enterprises, we introduced pretty much mandatory audit firm rotation around 2011, 2012, without being prompted by this report, but prompted in the main by our concern that there were a number of audit firms that had been auditing our state-owned companies, especially the large ones, for a number of years, and we felt that it was important for us to introduce the rotation. In actual fact, that has worked well, because the audit firms that were given the opportunity as a result have performed quite well in the execution of their responsibility, and as a result, even that we may talk about these 4% audit, black audit firms, market capitalization that we are talking about. It's as a result, among others, of those decisions. And in a way, it helped a number of other companies in the private sector to gain confidence in these black audit firms and to give them an opportunity. The trend may seem to have moments of spike and moments of falling as the years go on. But what we are trying to do with this decision is to ensure that in the process of rotating the companies, more players are brought on board, and we are able to give opportunity to many South African firms, to many black firms, to also gain a foothold in the audit market. Now, The concern that I have raised, which I wish to reiterate, is that it is important for us to ensure that as we implement mandatory audit firm rotation, that we ensure transformation as a result, so that the mandatory audit firm rotation doesn't end up becoming the rotation of the big four in the capital markets, but that the other firms in South Africa also gain an opportunity. It's a conversation, it's a decision which I applaud and which I hope will occasion a necessary response and discussion in the country, because South Africa must remain singularly focused on the questions of transformation and the questions of growing the economy, and ensure that in the decisions we make, we continue to place those issues of growth and transformation at the top of our agenda. Having said that, let me just deal with the two questions that were raised by Karen and Calden. The issue of board appointments, Karen, you may not know. Boards are what public enterprises did, and what they still do, is to formulate a template of the skills matrix required by each board. They then look at who are the people who possess the skills that are required in order to satisfy and fulfill that matrix. That process takes place long before the matter is brought to the minister for decision, and including the identification of the names that are going to play that role. Now, when it comes to the minister, it's for the minister to okay the decision and to take the process forward to cabinet. And the board members are all appointed on the basis that each one of you will be assessed. There is no board member who has a permanent role in any state-owned company. When I became Minister of Public Enterprises in 2010, there were board members who had served on boards of Eskom, Transnet, SAA, some for longer than 9 years, who had sort of become permanent in the boards. And we took a decision that every board member in the first instance must not serve more than 2 terms of 3 years each. And secondly, every board member is appointed subject to annual review. That's why, with regard to the gentleman who served on the board of SAA, when we realized that the skills he possessed, regardless of his international experience, that the skills he possessed were not commensurate with the skills we wanted, we then removed him from the board and left that position vacant to say we will still look for another board member from the BRICS countries with aviation, with international aviation experience, in order to fulfill that requirement, because for us at the time, the policy strategic decision was that SAA needed to begin flying to the BRICS countries. Among others, during that period, we also launched new routes to Beijing. We launched new routes to other BRICS countries, but already the routes to Sao Paulo already existed. So we were looking at any person with the requisite skills. And when we realized that the gentleman did not have requisite skills, he was removed from the board. And that vacancy was not filled. I'm not sure whether it was subsequently filled after I had left public enterprises. With regard to Transnet, there may not be a direct causal link between the two issues, because nobody has given me these emails. Nobody has told me how these emails were obtained, whether through proper means, whether they have not been fabricated. I don't know. And I think therefore there is no causal link between the gentleman and the allegation made yesterday and leading up to me. Because ministers don't sit in board meetings. Ministers don't appoint committees except the Risk and Audit Committee. And ministers don't sit in procurement decisions of state-owned companies. I've got absolutely nothing to do with the procurement of state-owned companies, of entities in my portfolio now with Treasury, or even the department for that matter. One member of parliament last year accused me of having appointed and signed a contract of a company that was appointed at Home Affairs in 2011 when I was not Minister of Home Affairs, when I was Minister of Public Enterprises. And therefore, both on the basis of the fact that I was not Minister of Home Affairs in 2011 and on the basis of the fact that ministers do not sit in board evaluation and board adjudication committees, I didn't even know I don't even know here at Treasury who are the members of board adjudication committees. So I honestly cannot be said to be involved in any procurement in that regard. So I myself have done no wrong. And I think we all, when you have the benefit of hindsight, you always may act as if prior to you knowing what you know now, you would have known it beforehand, if you get what I'm saying. If anybody knew that by 2008, big firms were going to collapse, then yeah, you would have taken certain decisions prior to that. But nobody knew that, and they collapsed, and that caused major havoc around the world. And so when you don't know whether a person has any malicious intentions and whether you can impute malicious intentions to that person, you will not know prior to the decisions being made that this thing may happen in this particular way, because if you would have known, you certainly would have taken a different decision. I am on record saying that I believe that we should run clean government, both when I was at Public Enterprises and as recently as this week on Wednesday, when we announced the decision about ESCOM. I made it very clear that I believe that state-owned companies can be run efficiently and must be run efficiently, and there is nothing inherently inefficient in state-owned companies. And so I maintain that belief. And I'm quite glad that there is a commission of inquiry that will look at all these allegations, including all others, because there are many other allegations with regard to other issues related to these ones that the commission will look at. And I think we should be allowed an opportunity, instead of answering to anecdotes, to sit before that commission and provide answers as to the issues the allegations that have been made. And one is quite aware that the allegations are going to continue being made. And so a commission of inquiry will assist us in that regard to provide answers to all of the issues that are being made. There are many other issues that, some people believe I have signed the nuclear deal at Treasury. They believed I signed it even on the first day of my arrival. And even when I said there is no nuclear deal signed, and the Minister of Energy said there is no nuclear deal that has been signed, some people continued making the allegations. It is to impugn integrity. It is meant to divert us from the work of transformation and growing the economy. And we are going to remain focused on that task. And I think we should be allowed to sit in front of the Commission of Inquiry and answer to the allegations that have been made. The final point that the second question I wish to answer is with regard to the integrated financial management system. The internal audit at Treasury conducted an investigation into the system. They produced a preliminary report. They looked at it and they produced a final report, which found that there were a number of things which had not happened according to regulations in their own opinion. And I want to commend the internal auditors at Treasury for their courage, for their independence, for being able to conduct that report without any fear or favor. Having concluded that report, it was then decided that the report must be subjected to a forensic investigation. Because even though the report of the internal auditor itself says that there were things which had gone wrong, they could not directly apportion blame to anyone and had no conclusive evidence towards that effect. And so you needed a forensic investigation that would take that process forward. That process was taken forward up to a point where the service provider appointed had a disagreement, a fundamental disagreement with the department on the type of investigation conducted, because the department felt that they had not gone as extensively as they ought to have in order to arrive at a correct decision. And that's why the department made two decisions in that regard. One was that we're going to reject this report. Two, we're going to we're not going to pay you unless you provide us a report which has been extensively investigated. If you refuse to do that, then we will appoint another service provider. The processes are underway to look at that. And that's why we came out as the ministry and said, there is no final report. Yes, there is a final internal audit report, but there is no final forensic investigations report. And so we are going on with that process. Once we've concluded it, we will make the necessary determinations as to what is the next step to take when we have received that final report, forensic investigation report. Thank you.
Minister, I know you have to run. Barry, can I take that question after this one, because the minister really has the flight to catch. I'm available. I know I'm not a big catch like the minister, but I'm available to take up any other questions. I'd like to thank the CE and I'd like to thank the minister for the time they gave us today. Thank you. Thank you. Can you meet me on the sideline, then we talk with the minister will be there.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm just grabbing my stuff.
I'm gonna. Please, I don't know.